The chamber of the Galactic Empire was built with walls of shining stone, glowing with alien light and filled with voices that shook the air. The rulers of the stars sat high upon their thrones, their eyes sharp, their bodies heavy with pride. They were kings and queens of hundreds of worlds, masters of countless fleets, and they had gathered for one single reason: humanity. The name was spoken like a curse, like a joke, like something too small to matter. Some laughed as they said it, others spat it out as if the word itself was dirty. To them, mankind was a new race, fragile, short-lived, and foolish. A race that had barely touched the stars, yet spoke of freedom, independence, and courage. The Empire could not allow it. "We must demand war," said one ruler, his voice echoing like thunder. His skin was scaled in gold, his claws tapping against the throne as he leaned forward. The humans refuse tribute, they refuse obedience, and they refuse to kneel. They are dangerous. They are stubborn. They must be crushed before they rise. A second ruler hissed in agreement, her long tail curling across the floor. They have no true strength. Their bodies break easily, their lives are short. One war, one strike, and their world will burn. Why do we waste time with talk? The chamber filled with voices. Some demanded fleets, others demanded fire, and still others demanded slaves. Every word was spoken with arrogance, every sound filled with certainty. They believed war with mankind would be nothing but sport. And yet, in the shadows of the hall, there was silence. At the center of the chamber, standing tall, though outnumbered, was a human general. He wore no shining crown, no armor of gold, only the dark uniform of Earth's defense. His hands were behind his back, his face calm, his eyes steady. He listened to the Empire's demands, but he did not tremble. Some rulers turned their gaze upon him, sneering. "Do you hear us, human?" one said with a mocking grin. "Your kind is nothing but insects." "We step on insects without fear," another laughed. "Tell us, General, will your people cry when the first city burns? Will they beg when the first world falls?" Still, the general did not answer. His silence was not weakness. It was patience. The council roared louder, each voice climbing higher, each demand sharper. They wanted war. They wanted blood. They wanted mankind crushed before it could become more than a spark in the darkness. The general raised his head at last. His eyes moved across the chamber, meeting the gaze of kings, queens, and conquerors. He did not speak, not yet. But the calm in his stare carried weight, as if he knew something they did not. It was this calm that silenced the chamber for a brief moment. Not long, but enough. The rulers leaned forward. They expected fear, begging, or perhaps a desperate speech. Instead, they saw a soldier who stood as if the war was already written in his favor. One ruler slammed his claw against the stone. "You do not understand, human. We are the Empire. We have ships larger than your continents. We have armies greater than your population. You are ants before giants. Do you think silence will save you?" The general finally spoke, but his voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I understand," he said simply. "But do you?" The rulers frowned. Some laughed at the strange question, others hissed in anger. The general did not repeat himself. He let the words hang in the chamber like smoke, drifting into the ears of the powerful. His tone carried no threat, no shout, no anger. Only quiet certainty. The rulers mocked his silence again, but beneath their laughter there was a spark of unease. Why was he not afraid? Why did he not beg? Why did he not warn them of Earth's weapons or armies? Instead, he stood calm, whispering only a question they could not answer. Outside the chamber, the stars burned quietly. Across those stars, fleets of the Empire waited, their cannons pointed, their engines alive. They believed they would march easily across the sky, destroying one world after another. But inside the chamber, for the first time, they met something different. Not weapons. Not armies. A man who knew the truth of mankind. And though the council still shouted for war, the whisper of the general had already begun to dig into their pride. The war was demanded. The fleets were ready. The rulers believed victory would come in days. But the calm of one man made the entire chamber feel for a moment the weight of something far greater than empires. The demand for war had been spoken. The truth of mankind had not yet been revealed, and that was the beginning of everything. The chamber of the Empire was still buzzing with voices, rulers shouting for war, claws and fists striking the tables, laughter echoing through the walls. Yet the human general remained silent. His calm face was not that of a man surrounded by enemies, but that of someone who carried a secret heavier than the stars themselves. For a moment, he looked small compared to the alien lords around him. They were tall, armored, crowned in jewels of other worlds. Their weapons were forged from metals unknown to Earth. Their ships could cross the galaxy in a single breath of time. Humanity was nothing beside them, or so they thought. But the general knew something they did not. Behind his eyes was a memory older than their empire, a truth carved into the blood of his people. He did not see weakness when he thought of mankind. He saw history that had been paid in fire and sorrow, in war and survival. He remembered Earth not as it was now with cities of light and engines of space, but as it once had been, scarred, broken, filled with storms and danger. Humanity had been born not in safety but in struggle. They were raised by hunger, chased by beasts, shaped by cold winters and burning deserts. The empire rulers knew only conquest, but mankind had known survival since its first breath. The general's silence was not empty. It was filled with voices of the past, the echoes of soldiers who had marched with nothing but hope, the cries of mothers who had buried their children in times of famine, but still pushed forward, the chants of revolutions that toppled kings, the endless, unbroken chain of struggle that had carried humanity from caves to the stars. And so, when the rulers called mankind fragile, the general almost smiled. Fragile, perhaps in flesh, but not in spirit. He thought of the first wars of Earth, tribes clashing with stones and spears, fighting not for glory but survival. He thought of empires that had risen with pride and fallen in fire, while humanity itself endured, always building again, always adapting. He thought of diseases that had swept across nations, killing millions, yet never breaking the will of the living. Every wound of history had left a scar, and every scar had made humanity harder to kill. The empire measured strength in ships, weapons, and armies, but the general knew strength could be measured in endurance, in the ability to stand back up no matter how many times the world tried to crush you. "Do you believe war will be simple?" he finally asked, his voice quiet, his eyes steady. The rulers laughed, thinking it was a weak protest. One of them sneered, his fangs shining in the chamber light. "War with humans will last 1 week," he declared. A short battle and then silence. But the general did not argue. He let them laugh because he knew their mistake. They thought in numbers. Humanity thought in survival. The rulers believed in strength of today. Humanity carried the strength of yesterday, of thousands of yesterdays carved into their very souls. For every city that had fallen in history, a new one had risen. For every war that had ended in fire, there was another generation ready to fight again. For every plague that had darkened the earth, humans had found a cure, and if they had no cure, they had endured anyway. This was the weight of history. It was not glory. It was not shining crowns or golden thrones. It was pain, suffering, and struggle, but it was also survival, and survival was the greatest weapon mankind had ever built. The general let the silence hang again. Around him, the rulers grew restless. They expected begging, they expected fear, but instead, the humans stood like a mountain, unshaken, unmoved, as if their threats were nothing but wind against stone. One ruler slammed his fist down. "Speak, human. Why do you not beg? Why do you not fear?" The general's lips curved slightly, not a smile of arrogance, but the quiet smile of a man who knew something greater than power. "Because fear is not new to us," he said softly. "We have carried it since the beginning, and yet we are still here." The chamber froze. His words were not loud, yet they cut deeper than any shout. For the first time, the empire rulers looked at the human not as a weak insect, but as something they could not fully understand. How could such a fragile race stand so tall against the might of empires? How could a man, alone in a hall of enemies, speak without trembling? It was not pride. It was not arrogance. It was history. The rulers could not see it, but the general could feel it like armor around him. Every soldier who had died in mud and blood, every woman who had carried fire through the darkness, every child who had grown stronger in the ruins of war, all of them stood behind him. The weight of history pressed down on his shoulders, but it did not break him. It lifted him, and in that moment the empire began to feel something they did not expect. Not fear of weapons, not fear of armies, fear of a truth. The truth that mankind had never needed to be the strongest, the fastest, or the longest living. They had only ever needed to survive, and survival had made them unstoppable. The council still shouted for war, but their voices now carried a shadow of doubt. For in the quiet strength of one man, they had heard the weight of history. And it was heavier than all the fleets of the Empire. The chamber of the Galactic Empire did not fall silent for long. The words of the human general had touched them, but pride is a dangerous armor, and the rulers wore it heavier than steel. They laughed, though some laughs were sharp and uneasy. They sneered, though their eyes carried a flicker of doubt. And as one voice fell quiet, another rose louder, drowning out the whisper of truth the human had spoken. "The man is a fool," said a lord with skin like iron and eyes like burning stars. He stood tall, his crown forged from the metals of dying suns. "He speaks of history, of survival, but what is survival compared to conquest? We have ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. We are the fire that consumes worlds. And he dares to speak of scars?" The chamber cheered in agreement, the sound rolling like thunder. Pride filled their lungs. Arrogance burned in their words. Another ruler leaned forward, her wings spreading wide, each feather tipped with silver. "Does mankind not understand?" she hissed. "We are not like them. Our lives are long. Our fleets cover the stars. We have crushed greater races than theirs. Do they think they are special?" The general did not answer. He stood with the same calm silence that had unsettled them before. His stillness was sharper than any insult, and it only made their pride swell higher. They began to boast, one after another. "We have ships larger than mountains. We have armies that fill entire planets. We have weapons that can burn oceans to steam." Each voice grew louder, each boast more grand. They competed with one another, eager to prove who had the greatest power, who carried the greatest pride. It was not enough to threaten mankind. They had to remind themselves again and again of their own greatness. But beneath their roaring, something was shifting. The more they shouted, the more their words revealed not strength but fear of weakness. The general watched them closely. He saw through the layers of their arrogance. He saw the cracks forming in their armor of pride. They mocked humans for short lives, but behind their words was envy. They laughed at human struggle, but behind their laughter was uncertainty. The general knew the truth. Pride blinds, and blinded rulers always fall. One emperor struck his staff against the floor, silencing the chamber for a moment. His voice was deep, ancient, filled with authority. "This human dares to whisper of endurance," he said, glaring at the general. "But what is endurance without power? They live short lives. They burn quickly like sparks. We are eternal flames. We rule not by survival, but by domination. Mankind will bow or mankind will vanish." The council cheered again, their voices rising as one. In that moment, their pride reached its peak, a mountain of arrogance so high it seemed untouchable. Yet the general did not flinch. Instead, he stepped forward. Just one step. The sound of his boots against the floor echoed through the chamber. It was not loud, but it was enough to cut into their cheering, enough to turn their eyes back toward him. "You speak of power," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the hall. "You speak of fleets, weapons, and worlds. But power is nothing without will. And will is something you will never understand." The rulers hissed and growled. Some shouted at him to be silent, but he continued calm as stone. "You call us weak because our lives are short," he whispered. "But that is why we fight harder. You live for centuries, and so you believe tomorrow will always come. We live knowing tomorrow may not arrive. That is why we rise each morning ready to struggle again. That is why we build, why we adapt, why we endure." The chamber stirred. Some rulers mocked him, but others shifted uncomfortably. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Still, pride would not break so easily. One lord of war rose from his seat, towering over all others. His armor was black as night, his voice like rolling thunder. "Do not mistake words for strength, human," he roared. "We have faced races stronger than you. We have broken warriors fiercer than you, and we crushed them as we will crush you." He pointed his blade toward the general. "You are nothing." The general did not move. He only met the alien's glare with calm eyes. "If we are nothing," he said softly, "then why are you afraid to listen?" The chamber froze. The words cut deep, striking at the heart of their pride. Pride could not answer that question. Pride could roar. Pride could boast. But pride could not explain why one human standing alone made them feel uneasy. The rulers began to shout again, their voices desperate now, trying to drown the quiet truth. They demanded war. They demanded fire. They demanded the destruction of mankind, but their pride, though heavy, was beginning to tremble. The general saw it. He knew the moment had not yet come to reveal the full truth. But he also knew that pride would be their weakness. The empire demanded war, but war was not only fought with ships and weapons. It was also fought with hearts, with will, with endurance, and pride had blinded the empire to the storm that was coming. The general stood silent again, and silence was sharper than any sword. The voices of the empire still filled the chamber, roaring like storms echoing through the stone halls of power. Pride had risen high, anger had sharpened, and arrogance had drowned reason. Yet through it all, one man stood still, unshaken, as if he were carved from the very rock beneath their feet. The human general. He had listened to their boasts. He had heard their threats. He had endured their laughter. And still he remained silent. His silence was no longer weakness in their eyes. It was something else, something they could not explain. Finally, when the noise reached its loudest, he lifted his hand. Just a small gesture. No command, no weapon, only a hand. And slowly the voices began to fall. Not because he forced them, not because he demanded silence, but because something inside them wanted to hear what this human would finally say. The general's eyes swept across the chamber, meeting the gaze of lords and queens, of conquerors and emperors. His voice did not rise like theirs. It did not thunder. It did not roar, it whispered. "You think mankind is weak," he began, each word soft, but each word cutting like a blade. "You think we bleed too easily, that we die too young, that our lives are too short. You see our flesh and you call it fragile. You see our bones and you call them brittle. You see our history and you call it chaos." He paused. No one moved. The chamber, once filled with thunder, now listened to a whisper. "But you do not understand," he continued, "because in every weakness you see there is a strength you cannot measure." The rulers shifted uneasily. Some glared, others frowned, but none spoke. "When we bleed," the general whispered, "we learn how to heal. When we die, we leave behind children who remember. When our lives are short, we live them with fire. And when chaos comes, we do not fall, we adapt." The ruler's pride began to tremble. His words were not shouted, yet they struck deeper than any threat. "You have lived long, and you believe that makes you eternal," the general said. "But you have forgotten struggle. You have forgotten fear. You have forgotten what it means to fight not for conquest, but for survival." He took one slow step forward. The sound of his boot echoed louder than their fleets. "Mankind has not forgotten." His voice dropped even lower, a whisper that forced every ear in the chamber to lean closer. "We have been hunted by beasts before we had tools. We have been broken by storms before we built homes. We have been torn by plagues before we learned medicine, and through every wound, through every fire, through every death we endured." He stopped, letting silence fill the room. The rulers who once laughed now sat frozen. "Your empires are built on conquest," he whispered. "Ours is built on survival. You rule because you are strong. We live because nothing has ever been strong enough to kill us all." The words fell like stones into the hearts of the rulers. They had spoken of their fleets, their weapons, their endless power. Yet here stood a man who reminded them of something they could not destroy: the will to endure. One emperor slammed his fist on the table. His voice cracked as he shouted, "You dare threaten us?" But the general only shook his head. "No," he whispered. "I do not threaten. I only tell you the truth." And that truth was heavier than any weapon. Another queen hissed, her wings shivering with rage. "You believe survival makes you strong. It makes you desperate. Desperation is not power." The general's eyes turned toward her, calm, steady, unblinking. "Desperation," he whispered, "is the mother of power. It is why we fight harder than those who believe themselves safe. It is why we adapt when others fall. It is why we stand even when the world tries to bury us." The chamber fell quiet again. The whisper of truth had spread through the room like fire in dry grass. It could not be unseen. It could not be unheard. The rulers shifted uncomfortably. They had come expecting weakness, begging, or arrogance. Instead, they found a calm whisper that made their own strength feel hollow. And in that moment, many of them understood something they had never admitted before. Mankind was not weak. Mankind was dangerous. Not because of weapons. Not because of ships. Not because of armies. But because they could not be broken. The general lowered his hand again, his whisper fading into silence. You demanded war, he said quietly. But you forget what war is to us. To you, it is conquest. To us, it is memory. It is history. It is the reason we are still here. His words hung heavy in the chamber, pressing down on every ruler like a storm. The general had not raised his voice. He had not made a threat. He had not shown a weapon. And yet for the first time the empire felt something they had not expected. Not victory, not certainty. Fear. The whisper of truth had broken their pride. And the war they demanded no longer felt so simple. The chamber of the galactic empire had fallen into silence, a silence heavier than any weapon. The human general's whisper still lingered in the air, curling through the pride of rulers who had never been questioned before. For a heartbeat, for a moment that stretched like eternity, no one moved. Then the silence broke. Laughter erupted. It was sharp, cruel, desperate laughter, the kind that hides fear. One lord slapped the table, his golden armor rattling as his voice rang out. Do you hear him? He thinks scars are strength! He thinks suffering is victory. What a pitiful race. Others joined him, voices crashing together in mockery. They laughed louder than before, as if the sound itself could erase the unease that had crawled into their hearts. But not all of them laughed. Some rulers leaned back in their seats, their eyes narrowing, their claws drumming against stone. They remembered wars of their own past, wars where arrogance had blinded them. They knew the whisper of truth when they heard it, even if they dared not admit it aloud. The general watched them all. His face was calm, his eyes steady, as if their laughter meant nothing. In truth, their reaction was exactly what he expected. Pride always mocks what it fears. One queen, her voice like liquid silver, rose from her throne. Her wings trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. You speak well, human, she hissed. But you forget yourself. Empires are not built on whispers. They are built on power, and we have more power than your kind could ever dream. The general tilted his head slightly. Power without understanding is weakness, he whispered. The queen snarled, but she did not answer. Another ruler slammed his fist down, rising to his feet. His armor was black, his eyes like burning coals. Enough, he roared. This human tries to turn our chamber into a place of fear. Do you not see? He hopes to make us hesitate, to make us question our destiny. But I say this, let the fleets burn Earth. Let humanity learn the true cost of defiance. The chamber shook with cheers. War drums echoed in their voices. The empire demanded blood. Yet even as they shouted, the seeds of doubt remained, because the general had not spoken like a man begging for mercy. He had spoken like a man certain of victory, not through strength of arms, but through the will of survival. And that frightened them more than any weapon could. One elder lord, his body frail with age, leaned forward. His voice was quiet, almost trembling. I have seen many races, he said. I have watched empires rise and fall. And I tell you this, those who laugh at survival often fall to it. Do not mistake weakness where there is endurance. The chamber turned on him, voices rising in anger. You defend them? You speak for insects? The elder lowered his gaze, but did not speak again. The general's calm eyes flicked toward him, and for the first time, a shadow of a smile touched his lips. Not joy, not triumph, but recognition. Someone had understood, if only for a moment. Still, the empire's pride refused to break. The rulers shouted louder, covering doubt with arrogance. They declared war again and again, as if repeating the words would make them true. But the general stepped forward once more. His voice was soft, steady, unshaken. You think war will destroy us, he whispered. But you do not know what war means to mankind. War is not new to us. It is not a shadow we fear. It is the fire that shaped us. Every city we built, every nation we raised was born from struggle. You cannot destroy us with war. War is where we were made. The chamber grew restless. Some rulers shouted denial. Others fell silent, their pride trembling against the weight of his words. You call us fragile, the general said, his whisper carrying like thunder in their hearts. But fragile things break. We do not break. We endure, we rise, we return. His voice faded, but the silence that followed was louder than all the fleets of the empire. For the first time, the rulers of the empire faced something they had never known. An enemy who did not fear war but welcomed it. An enemy who did not seek conquest but survival. An enemy who could not be broken even by the weight of galaxies. Some rulers turned to each other, whispering doubts. Some clenched their fists tighter as if holding onto pride like a weapon, and some, though they would never admit it aloud, felt the first cold touch of fear. The Empire had demanded war. But now, for the first time, war no longer seemed certain. The general's whisper had cracked the walls of arrogance. And once cracks appear, even the strongest empire begins to fall. The rulers shouted once more, their voices clashing like storms. But in their hearts they no longer shouted only for conquest. They shouted to drown the truth they had just heard, the truth of mankind. The chamber of the empire trembled with voices. Rulers shouted over each other, some demanding war, others whispering doubt. Pride and fear clashed like storms, but in the middle of the chaos the human general stood unmoved, as steady as stone. He had listened long enough. Now it was time to reveal the strength that the empire had never seen, the strength they could not measure. Slowly, he raised his head. His eyes swept the chamber, calm, sharp, unflinching. When he spoke, it was once again not a roar, not a command, but a whisper. "You believe mankind is weak," he said softly. "You see flesh that tears, bones that break, lives that pass in a blink. But you do not see the strength hidden inside us. You do not see what we become when we are pushed to the edge." The rulers leaned forward. Some sneered, but others grew still. His words carried weight like stones falling one by one into a deep well. The general stepped forward, each footfall echoing. "You believe war will break us. But war is where you will see the truth, because the strength of mankind is not in our weapons, not in our fleets, not in our numbers. Our strength is in our unity. Our strength is in what we become when desperation binds us together." The rulers frowned, puzzled. Unity? To them, unity was chains forced by power and fear. But the general's tone carried something different, something they could not understand. He continued, "When one of us falls, another rises. When one city burns, another rebuilds. When death takes one generation, the next carries the fight forward. We do not end. We do not give in. We endure together." His voice lowered further, drawing them in. "You see us as fragile because we are many and different. But that is our strength. We argue, we fight, we struggle. But when the fire comes, when the storm rises, when the enemy stands at our gates, we become one. Not because we are forced, but because we choose it, and that choice makes us unstoppable." The rulers shifted in their seats. Some scoffed, but their eyes betrayed unease. The general pressed on. "Empires fall because they believe in eternal victory. They grow fat with pride, blind to weakness. But humanity has never known eternal victory. We have only known struggle. That is why we are ready for war in ways you cannot imagine." He let the words hang. Memories of Earth rose in his mind. Cities rebuilt after fire, survivors walking through ruins, hands reaching for each other in the dark. That was mankind's hidden strength. Not weapons, not conquest, but the will to hold on to one another when the world tried to break them. He whispered again, almost too soft to hear. "We are dangerous not because we love war, but because we survive it. We are dangerous not because we are strong, but because we refuse to die." The rulers stared at him. Some clenched their fists, some turned their faces away, and some, for the first time, truly listened. An elder queen leaned forward, her jeweled crown tilting. Her voice trembled as she asked, "And if we strike together? If we send every fleet, every weapon, every army against you, will your unity still save you?" The general's eyes locked on hers. "Yes," he whispered. "Because when you strike us with all your strength, you will only teach us how to fight harder. And when one of us falls, 1,000 more will rise to take their place. You cannot crush what will not stop." Her wings twitched. She leaned back, silent. The general turned his gaze across the hall. "You call us children. And maybe we are. But children grow. Children learn. Children remember. And when the fire of war touches us, we do not forget. We adapt, we endure. We rise." The rulers sat frozen. His words were no longer only whispers. They were truths sinking into their hearts, truths they had never wanted to face. The empire had always believed strength came from size, from power, from fear. But here stood a man who spoke of strength born from struggle, unity, and desperation. Strength that could not be crushed. Some rulers began to argue again, their voices sharp with panic. "He lies! Humanity cannot stand against us!" But their anger sounded thin now, like glass ready to crack, because deep inside they all felt the same thing. If what the general whispered was true, then mankind was not weak. Mankind was the most dangerous enemy they had ever faced, not because they sought war, but because war could not kill them. The chamber filled with noise again, but beneath the shouting was a quiet tension, heavy and unshakable. The whisper of the general had planted itself in their hearts, and no pride could erase it. The hidden strength of humanity had been revealed, and the Empire, for the first time, began to wonder if demanding war had been the greatest mistake of all. The chamber of the Galactic Empire was no longer the same place it had been when the human general first entered. Then it had been filled with laughter, with pride, with rulers who believed mankind was nothing but dust under their boots. Now the air was heavy. Their words still shouted, their fists still struck, but beneath the noise was something new, uncertainty. The general had whispered the truth, and the truth had not gone away. One ruler rose to his feet, his armor flashing with gold. He slammed his staff down. "This is madness," he growled. "We are the Empire. We have crushed greater foes. Why do we waste time with words from this fragile creature? Let the fleets burn Earth, let the war begin." His voice was strong, but the chamber did not roar with the same confidence it once had. Another queen, tall and proud, spread her wings wide. "He is right," she hissed. "We cannot let humans defy us. If we hesitate, they will grow bolder. They will believe themselves equal. That cannot be allowed." Yet her voice shook ever so slightly, as if she too feared the whisper of truth. Then the elder lord who had spoken before rose once more. His body was frail, his voice cracked with age, but his eyes burned with clarity. "You fools," he said slowly. "You think strength is measured in fleets, but I have lived long enough to see this. Empires fall because they believe themselves eternal. Humanity may be young, but they are carved from survival. If you strike them, you will awaken an enemy you cannot contain." The chamber exploded in argument. Some shouted for war, others for caution. Voices clashed like swords. The sound filled the air, but no decision came. Through it all, the general stood still, his face calm, his eyes steady. He had said all he needed to say. He would not beg. He would not argue. He had shown them the truth, and now the choice was theirs. Finally, one empress, her crown heavy with diamonds, leaned forward. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the chamber like a knife. "Tell me, human," she said, "if we choose war, if we strike Earth with all our might, what will mankind do?" The general's eyes met hers. He did not hesitate. His voice was soft, but every word was clear. "We will fight," he whispered. "We will bleed. We will burn. We will lose cities, worlds, children, and brothers. But we will not stop. We will rise again and again, until the war is no longer yours but ours. And when it becomes ours, you will lose. Not because we are stronger, but because we refuse to end." Silence fell again. A silence deeper than before. The rulers stared at him, their hearts heavy. Some saw only arrogance. Some saw madness. But many saw the truth, and that truth frightened them more than any weapon. One lord spat in anger. "Lies, empty words," he shouted. "They are ants. Ants do not kill giants." The general turned his gaze toward him, his whisper cutting through the room. "No," he said softly. "But ants survive the fall of giants always." The chamber froze. The words struck deeper than any threat. Because deep inside, the rulers knew it was true. Giants had fallen before. Empires had burned before. And always survival had belonged to those who endured. Now the empire faced its final choice. Some rulers demanded war. Their pride would not let them bend. Others whispered doubt, their voices shaking, their eyes darting toward the silent human who had spoken no threats, only truth. The chamber roared for hours, voices colliding like storms, and still the general stood silent, his whisper already echoing inside their minds. At last, the great gong sounded, the sign that the council must decide. Would they unleash their fleets, their weapons, their fire upon Earth? Or would they step back, not out of mercy, but out of fear of awakening something they could not control? The general lowered his head slightly. He did not push them. He did not beg for peace. He had done what he came to do. He had shown them mankind's truth. As the council moved toward its decision, one thought haunted them all. The Empire had demanded war. But war with mankind was no simple conquest. It was a storm that could not be controlled, only survived. And now, every ruler in the chamber asked themselves a question they had never thought possible. Were they ready to pay the price of discovering what mankind truly was? The chamber doors closed. The decision was theirs. But the whisper of truth had already changed the galaxy forever.